This is E&P Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. Hi, once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. And some say the shoemaker's child sometimes ends up walking barefoot. When I was a kid, even though my dad was a dentist, I didn't get a checkup every 6 months. And some also say that an industry that invests a lot of energy and effort in helping its advertisers market and brand themselves does a pretty lousy job at marketing and branding itself, the North American newspaper industry. That's one of the reasons that the Newspaper Association Managers has started a project called the Relevance Project. It started last year. And at the time, Michelle Ray, Executive Director of the New York Press Association, was the manager of NAM, Newspaper Association of Managers, who started the Relevancy Project. Now it's under the direction of Steve Nixon and all the other NAM managers. Steve is the Executive Director of Saskatchewan Weekly Newspaper Association. And their new hire is Tom Silvestri. That name likely rings a bell because Tom has been in our industry for decades at senior management positions with both Media General, Berkshire Hathaway, Lee Enterprises, as the publisher of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Well, Tom recently retired, but decided he wanted to stay with the industry and champion the Relevance Project. It's exciting stuff. And the three of these individuals, industry leaders, have a lot to say, not only about the Relevance Project, but about where the industry is today. So let's not delay. Let's get started. As I go 1-on-3 today with Steve Nixon, Michelle Ray, and Tom Silvestri as we discuss the Relevance Project. I love hosting E&P Reports when I have a Brady Bunch effect going on. I mean, this is because normally it's 1-on-1. Now it's 1-on-3. So, Tom Silvestri, are you Jan, the middle sister? I can't remember where they all were.
I'm anything you want me to be today, Mike.
All right, that's great. Well, anyway, I want to introduce our wonderful panel today on E&P Reports. In the top left corner, Steve Nixon. Steve, you have the distinction of being in charge of the Saskatchewan Press Association and also this year's head of NAM, N-A-M, which is Newspaper Association of Managers. Do I have that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And I have Michelle Ray. Michelle, you were last year's Executive Director of the Newspaper Association of Managers. You are still in charge of New York Press Association, correct?
That's correct.
And the guy on the bottom corner, Jan, he's wearing this hat with R on it. I assume that has something to do with the city of Richmond. Tom Silvestri?
Come on, Mike, it's relevance.
Well, you've only spent, a short time in Richmond, if I correct
you got to have the apparel.
Tom Silvestri, obviously an icon in our industry. Tom, you entered... Well, you started in New York, I know, as a reporter, but you went to Richmond and joined the team at the newspaper there, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, correct? Like in 82 and never left, correct?
Yeah, 1982. I came here and didn't know how long I'd stay and made a career out of it. Right place at the right time.
Also, you went through 2 ownership transitions. You were the first non-family member to run the flagship newspaper of Media News Group, correct?
Media General.
God, there's so many medias. And then you were part of the Berkshire Hathaway acquisition at the time as well, and you stayed with BH Media, correct?
Right, and I was there when Lee Enterprises took over the management responsibility, and now Lee owns the former BH Media Group. So actually 3 ownership changes. Why
don't we get rid of Steve and Michelle, and we'll just talk about all that, because that's another podcast on its own. I'd love to get the cultural things you had to go through and the pro formas you had to put. No. We're here to talk about another initiative. Newspaper Association of Managers last year. That's why I'm going to start with you, Michelle, just for a second, because you this was your baby you incubated through. First of all, what the heck is Newspaper Association Managers, if I may ask? Because some people attending this may not even understand that. What is it?
We're a decades-old coalition of all of the state press associations in the United States and all of the provincial associations in Canada. So there are 42 of us all together. We meet several times a year. Our ad managers meet together, our executive directors meet together, and we have a legislative conference in Washington, D.C. every year. We're the only 42 people who have things in common with each other because we're the only ones who do this job.
I remember once, I don't know if you remember me, speaking at one of your conferences. I had just started my company. It was on the West Coast. You were out on a pier or out in California, and it was a wonderful location. But thank you. That was, I think that, and I also up in Michigan once joined your conference. It's a wonderful group. And if I may just editorialize for a second, you guys work really, really hard. You answer to a board of different shapes and stripes, and you aren't doing this for the money, guys. So if I may say on behalf of the industry, thank you, state associations, for being there. And as someone who has, I've spoken at tons of conferences. I've got a big basket in my office, if you're interested, every badge I've ever had since 1984. This huge thing. But one of the things I love about state conferences is you really interact with, people tend to come there, the publishers, the editors, the sales reps. When travel is so expensive to go to the big conferences, you really get to meet people. So thank you to all of you that are involved with state associations. Now that we know what NAM is, tell me about the Relevance Project. Should I stay with Michelle on this, guys? Is that okay? Because you kind of incubated this project. Go ahead, Michelle.
So the genesis of the Relevance Project is that the newspaper association managers were at one of our annual conferences, and we were lamenting the impact that publicly traded companies had had on our associations, that the level of engagement had diminished substantially, that people just weren't utilizing our services the way we used to be. And there was sort of a lightning bolt moment, and both of us said that the state press associations and newspapers share a common problem, and that is that we're no longer as important as we used to be to the constituencies that we serve. And so we both needed to figure out whether we could remain relevant, whether we were relevant, and what we would do to reassert our relevance in the marketplace. Obviously, digital has disrupted our industry tremendously. That's no surprise or secret to anybody. But what hasn't happened is there hasn't been an adequate substitute or something to come along to take the place of what they disrupted. So we need to reinvent, rebrand, and reposition newspapers and the associations that serve them.
When you say constituency, Michelle, are you discussing the readership, the advertisers, the politicians of the state that you also work with, or all of the above?
All of the above, definitely, all of the above.
So your messaging is everywhere. You're just trying to say, we rock. We have a mission.
Well, we do rock. Nothing has replaced us. Nothing is as impactful as a full-page newspaper ad. Nothing. You can do anything you want with digital, but what the impact of print is, whether it's from an editorial standpoint or from an advertising standpoint, it's still the most powerful medium there is.
All right. So now, Steve, you are the one that took the project over as the executive director now of NAM. This is a one-year term. You guys just rotated through the whole association, I assume, Steve. So you've got...
Well, it is a one-year term, but it's just become a 2 one-year term because of COVID-19. So unfortunately, like everybody else, we've had to cancel some of our major meetings. So I get the coveted honor of being probably the only 2-year president.
Okay.
In NAM.
You have my bravos and my condolences. I'm just kidding. All right. So let me. What I was just going to ask you, what are you hearing from these hyper local managers of these associations about the pandemic? We cannot ignore the pandemic. It's just over everything we're doing. What are you hearing about how it's impacting the industry? Obviously bringing down revenue, but is there any good news out of all this that you're hearing first?
Well, there is, and I'm assuming this is also in the States, but it certainly is in Canada. It's bringing community back together, and they're really, really focusing on the importance of their own communities. And of course, the central part of that is the local community newspaper, who is bravely out there trying to bring in as much information that's relevant to the community as possible. And as you can imagine, it's a very, very, very confusing space out there at the moment. And even to the point where in Canada, we've got our federal government that is now looking at how to combat fake COVID-19 news that is all over the internet and creating real problems in some of our communities of misinformation. So we are looking at now how to bring that back, because everybody's looking at the community newspaper for that information. And so we need to be able to provide it.
It begs the question, Steve, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but how are the Canadian publishers feeling about the political world we're living down here in the States? When you look south, what are you thinking? I mean, you've closed your borders to us because we all have, I mean, I'm in Tampa Bay. I likely, who knows, we're down here, but what is the impression of the fake news or the world of news down here?
Well, it's not just in the US, of course. It's in Canada too. Don't think that it isn't. But we are saturated by US media up here, and so I would say that every child knows who Donald Trump is, and I'm not so sure they would all know who Justin Trudeau is. That's how the information flows. But we do scratch our heads, and we do wonder why the US is on the same level as a lot of third country nations around the world, where they don't have the resources, and you do have the resources. So we are confused, but it's a confusing time. So it's not all bad, of course. And luckily, we've got groups of people there that understand this, like yourself, and you know that there's an issue there, and we'll see how that pans out in when is your elections? November?
Yes, coming up very soon. Well, and obviously we're a culture that misspells the word color and mispronounces the word process, correct? Back to you, Michelle. Steve, Tom, hang in there. I'll get to you in a second. Michelle, since he was giving us the overview of the COVID crisis, possibly north of the border, you are one of the top 3 state associations in membership. New York, obviously, I'm sure California. I don't know which one's larger, but still, what are you hearing? What are you feeling? How we're doing?
I think our newspapers, I'll speak only to New York, but I will tell you that I think the newspapers in New York have done an absolutely outstanding job covering COVID-19. Everything is local, and so it's a global pandemic. But what matters in East Hampton is what matters to the people that live in East Hampton. What was happening in Manhattan is what was really important to the people in Manhattan. And actually, New York has been a little bit regional in its approach now. New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York have banded together, and we've now prohibited, I think it's 21 states at this point in time, from having people enter the state of New York, Connecticut, or New Jersey. If you've been in one of those 21 states, when you get to the airport, you have to register. But at any rate, I think it's been it's been overwhelming for them at the local level. People all of a sudden were working remotely. And these are not large companies who are used to handling that. And we had reporters, editors, photographers working remotely, doing an absolutely fantastic job. And they're all from such small communities that in many cases their spouses were people who were educating children from home. Their spouses are part of the fire department. Their spouses are part of the emergency department at the hospital. So the perspective is so tight and so local. It's just been remarkable. Continues to be remarkable. One
of the constants through these interviews, because we always have to bring up COVID-19 with whoever I'm interviewing, from Ken Doctor to a publisher that's increasing their circulation in a small market, is that crisis creates change, or it at least accelerates it. And one of the things that I think is fascinating is last year, without knowing that we were going to enter into a pandemic, your association decided you would start to try to change the paradigm or the perceptions that newspapers are relevant, thus the name Relevancy Project. Here comes a pandemic which actually accelerated the need for local news. There are communities now in North America that are news deserts, I hate that term, where the local paper isn't there anymore doing the job that is so necessary. So think of the timing of this as I turn to Tom finally. There's Jan Brady in the bottom corner. Tom, it's your time to come in. You retired from the Richmond newspaper when?
December 31st.
And you started with the Relevancy Project when?
May 1st. But let me just interject one thing, Mike. on the COVID, which is fascinating to me. I think COVID is the greatest journalism story about how the world is actually local. To Michelle's point, we've seen anecdotally, but in talking to the association executive directors, this has done more to speed up the transformation of newspaper media than perhaps any conference or any edict from somebody's memo. We have outstanding examples about how weekly papers have become daily news organizations just by responding to the community's unquenching thirst for trying to figure out what this pandemic is doing to my neighbor and what is it doing to my family. There's a paper in South Dakota that had a digital strategy for many, many, many years, and with the snap of a finger, all of a sudden became a daily news outlet in taking the state and national data and translating it into local information that made sense. I'm following this publisher in Carmel, California, who puts out a daily email update, not waiting for the weekly paper, on every change in what's happening with government policy or medical significance to his readers. And it's just amazing. So I think it's been a phenomenal example of how newspapers respond to the challenge. And being a former editor where you always tried to localize the state, localize the nation, you sort of struggle a little bit in how localizing the world. The pandemic has done that, but I think it's speeded up the transformation. To your point, I think that speed is accurate. Now, what are we going to do with the speed, and how can we capture the learnings from the speed? That's also a definition of relevance.
So thus, we're now discussing the Relevance Project. You are the executive director of the project. You report, I assume, to the board, to NAM, the Newspaper Association Managers. Let me ask you guys, how are you funded? I mean, is it, where's the money coming from? Are you getting grants? Have you applied for anything? Are you getting some Google money, if I may ask? How are you funding this project?
At the moment, we're funding it, self-funding it.
Okay.
But if you're interested in investing in it, I would happily appreciate.
Thank you. Everybody jokes we're not going to discuss nonprofit. E&P is a nonprofit because I took it over in September, put cash into it, and haven't taken a dollar out yet. We're turning that corner. I mean, my wife is looking at me like I'm a little crazy because every time we make money, I keep putting it. That's another story. But yes, guys, I'll give you some free publicity like we're doing right now to the industry.
We absolutely are looking for funders, Mike, and anybody who's interested in protecting democracy in either the US or Canada or both should be interested in helping this project go forward, because that's what we're all about at the end of the day.
Tom,
I think we're the one organization who will take it in American and Canadian dollars.
Depending upon which is worth more. Tom, I have some bullets from a press release that I believe I got from Michelle here. This is something that was on your website, Michelle, about the project. Here's how you defined relevance, and Tom, affects you in your life. Is this, am I getting the right list here? Impacts basic life priority, reflects personal preference, is related to the work you do, is geographically relevant, is civically relevant, is topical. Repositioning newspapers for relevance. Relevance is the paramount driver of news consumption. What messaging are you going to do to get that to this constituency of readers, advertisers, politicians, and anything else? What is your mission, Tom, and how are you accomplishing that?
Well, actually, Mike, E&P this month asked me to define relevance in terms of what I would tell, or what this project would tell publishers in the news business. And it was a good question to ask, because relevance is one of those words where you don't want it to be subject to different interpretations. But in what we do every day in newspapers, relevance just basically means that you are indispensable. That's not an easy thing to accomplish.
Wow.
But if you go into work each day where people, businesses, and organizations need you, then you're going to be relevant. It's also, on the traditional side, it's readers who continue to not be impatient to get, quote unquote, my newspaper every day or every week. It's news consumers who are addicted to your online updates. It's social media who sees you as fact. That's a relatively new definition of relevance. It's advertisers who call you first before they make their first marketing move, and your staffers are your best ambassadors in the community. And the government hires you to get information out because you're a viable and important source. And most importantly, you're super connected to your community for those important forums for discussions, debates, explorations of solutions, and civil discourse. Boy, isn't that at a premium right now?
Yeah.
On issues of importance. And two final points about relevance in the show of this project is you're using relevance to always seek ways to reinvigorate your brand of media. In a fractured media landscape, reinvigoration through relevance is so important. And one thing about relevance, if you have to explain it, you really need to step up your game.
Well, that's how many years have we heard ourselves in this industry say we are the worst at branding ourselves? We work for advertisers to help them with their marketing. You know, like the shoeless shoemaker's son, we never really focused on marketing our relevance to the community. It was always just an assumption that we were like a utility everybody needed. So now is the time to power that back in. Are you doing that messaging in the newspaper? Are you doing anything external? Is social media involved? What vehicles are you using to get that message out? Are papers supporting you, Steve?
Well, think of it as concentric rings, where you've got the newspaper, and around the newspapers are the press associations, and around the press associations are NAM or the coalition of trade groups. So I've heard that, and maybe I've said it once in my career. You know, we're in the communications business. Can we improve? I think it does somewhat of a disservice to those who really do it well, and there's some examples of that. So it starts with the newspapers communicating to its own readers and advertisers. We've also got some outstanding state and provincial press associations. I'm on their websites. I see their newsletters. I see their publications. They're out there pounding the message day in and day out. And then now you have the relevance projects to add to that sound of reasons that sounding the important alarms about what needs to get done. So in the relevance project, I think there's communications to the association members, and there's communications to their newspapers through the association members. And then, as you've seen with an emerging partnership with Metro Creative Graphics and Coda Ventures, are a series of advertisements that basically confirm that newspaper ads work. So whether it be in daily relevant points or columns and commentaries, or getting on the Zoom calls with my colleagues at the various press associations in task forces aimed at improving our messaging to advertisers and messaging to readers, there is enough we can never stop doing on behalf of newspapers. You know, Margaret Sullivan's book, Ghosting the News, came out recently. She's getting a lot of attention in there. There's not many solutions in there. She points to some emergent solutions, but she's really got an emphatic plea that we have to do everything to help the newspaper survive because of their vital importance. So we may not have every specific nail down because it changes.
Right.
When they, to Michelle and Steve's point, when they conceptualized the relevance point, there was no pandemic. Yeah. And talking to over 40 of the NAM members, the number one issue they face is revenue. So try getting their attention on some kind of a strategic discussion when they're worrying about revenue to be able to afford that paper that goes out the door. So I think we've got to be flexible.
Steve,
I was just going to say, to expand on that, we don't have a readership problem. We have a revenue problem. I'm meeting with the Saskatchewan caucus for the federal government on Monday, and our question to them is simple. It's what changed? Because we didn't. We still reach. We have an 84% reach into our community, which is incredible, and yet they're supporting other media, social media that isn't working into our markets. I still have 20% of Saskatchewan that does not have access to high-speed internet.
Wow.
And yet these people are just being forgotten. And even those that do have high-speed internet, they're not filling their days with advertising. They're blocking it off as wherever they can. But what they are doing is reading their local community newspapers. And for some reason, the powers that be have decided it's more sexy to go this way, or it's easier, or whatever it is that they've done, but it's incredibly non-effective. It's costing the people that live out here the right to know what's going on, and it's just unacceptable.
Just to make that an addendum, at the time of this recording, obviously it'll be aired at a later date, we had just posted a press release from Tennessee Press. Is it Carol that runs Tennessee?
That's Carol.
Carol had just finished a study that 80% of Tennesseans touch a newspaper every month, print and online, which brings up the next question back to you, if I may, Michelle. You were talking about digital and the disruption, but define to me today a newspaper when you have people like Walter Hussman, who now publishes one print copy a week and does the rest on iPads. That is still a newspaper to you. We can say the word newspaper and still discuss someone who even decides to do it all online. Is yes, no?
Yeah, absolutely. The digital disruption that I was referring to was the big three, Google, right, Facebook, taking away the advertising dollars. You know, I mean, we joke a lot at NAM, but that giant sucking sound is Google and Facebook taking away all of the revenue that local businesses used to invest in newspapers. The problem with that, of course, is that newspapers are the only entity with boots on the street. Google doesn't have any boots on the street. Facebook doesn't have any boots on the street. So there's nobody covering your wife's school board. There's nobody covering the flu shots. There's nobody covering what company is going to clean the elementary school. Who's going to make sure that the lighting in there is killing bacteria? You know, what company is covering what's happening locally with the lakes and the ponds and boating and whatnot? Google's not covering that. Facebook's not covering that. And that's the stuff that you want an involved citizenry to be weighing in on that stuff and participating in their government with that stuff. And Google and Facebook have just totally disrupted that. Our situation now is exactly what Steve said. We don't have an audience problem. We have the biggest audience we've ever had ever. And we have it spanning all decades. What we have is a revenue problem.
So
go ahead.
Can I just expand on that, Mike?
Sure, Steve.
Just to bring it down to a local Saskatchewan level, just what Michelle was saying, I'll give you an example. Our federal government used to spend a sizable amount of money in Saskatchewan to make sure that their messaging was disseminated, about $500,000 per annum. Last year, it was $4,500. And that is across the whole province for the whole year, which means that no one's getting that messaging. The federal government spent over $30 million of their budget, which is probably 65% of their advertising budget, on social media. 75% of that went to two companies, which we've mentioned before, which was Google and Facebook. The study after study that they've done has said that it's not working. No one's getting this information. And the average spend from the federal government in a newspaper in Saskatchewan was about $101 per annum. And there's just something wrong with this. It's just absolutely wasteful.
Well, you guys are going off into two directions of very important content. I mean, discussion. Number one would be, I can take it, if I may put you on the spot, Michelle, you are not in favor of Google and Facebook throwing a few $100 million at us, saying, here, just calm down, don't stay out of Congress, and let us monetize your news content. You're behind the efforts that are going on right now to have the big two or three, if you want to add Twitter to that, I assume that was your third, pay for the content that they monetize, correct? You are
absolutely. What other business do you know that a company can appropriate somebody else's product and remarket it and not pay for it? Where have you ever heard of such a thing?
Very, very well said. Now, the other thing that you just said, Steve, and Tom, I'd like you to weigh on this as well, is we have a revenue problem. And some have just thrown their hands in the air and said, okay, advertising will never cover the cost of my newsroom. We watched Gatehouse, now Gannett, say, okay, we're not going to worry about monetizing content anymore. We're going to sell digital services. You see where I'm going? And just stay away from our core competencies. which gutted newsrooms, if I may be so. That's my opinion. That's not. I mean, I'm just throwing I'm throwing an opinion.
We share it.
All right. Okay. So then they said, okay, then we'll either get people to pay for the damn content, or we will go nonprofit. What's the answer to all this? Is it all of the above? What do we need? Is it? Will we get a millennial to pay for content? That is the big question. And maybe Tom or Michelle or Steve, you guys are all leaders in the industry. Tom, what do you think? Is it possible to have?
Well, first of all, on the Facebooks and Googles, what always frustrated me is if I published what was on Facebook and Google, I would be buying retirement homes for libel lawyers. And you know, it's unfair that we're held to actually it's a compliment that we're held to a higher standard. But I think the world is coming around that Facebook and Google are in fact publishers. I've never heard a newspaper publisher say, yeah, I publish it, but I'm not responsible for it. Well, whose motto is that? And I think what we're coming into is distribution has always been a big part of the newspaper model, trucks and presses. So I think I think the industry has come around to a rallying point that it's not so much as paying for content, it's acknowledging that they are publishers because the modern day printing press is the internet. So, you know, it just would always drive me crazy that we were held to a different standard. And actually, trust in media is one of our strengths. We stand behind what we publish every day, but that's really not the case with Google and Facebook. So I think what you're seeing here, you're seeing an explosion of innovation, explosion of trying different models. People are trying more things because at the root of this, we're trying to preserve the importance of journalism. We're trying to make sure that journalism goes. I think there's also an emerging thought that journalism isn't a product, it is a service. And if I think we talk a little more about that, then it should find its way to those who value it and those who want to pay for it. Some of these arguments, you know, they kind of get old and stale, but I think you have to step back and, you know, the industry years ago was never viewed as a very innovative industry.
True.
But I think you're seeing more innovation, more trying, more experimentation, more asking what if than you've ever seen before, all the while trying to pay for what you do today.
Well, see, the project that you guys are trying to do is very interesting because I got started. Well, I was running the digital side of a local paper up in New England, but I was plucked away to work with some of the big vendors. That's how I started my world as a consultant. The first one was the point and shop malls, which was trying to aggregate an e-commerce solution. The second one was Ad One. This may ring a bell with some of you, where we were trying to aggregate the classified content of the industry pre-Craigslist, right? Pre-Realtor.com. We had the ads, we had the trust, but it was like herding cats to get a Hearst to work with a Gannett, to work with a media general. I mean, this was the problem. You're now trying to get an industry to work together through the state level. Is that in your I'm assuming that may be the way to go because the states have a really tight connection, more so with the individual publishers, no matter who the ownership is. I mean, I guess, because that was my next question. Where are you in relationship to larger organizations like America's Newspapers that launched recently, America's Newspapers Got Your Back? Are you working in tandem with them, or are these separate entities? Whoever wishes to answer that.
Well, America's Newspapers is a member of NAM, so by nature of it, they're part of us, and there is a collaboration. Actually, I was the chair of SNPA's foundation. SCPA and Inland merged to create America's Newspapers. I was on the foundation that the steering groups that helped put together America's Newspapers. The foundation the SNPA Foundation is a major supporter of the operations of America's Newspapers. And so by that nature alone, I've talked to Dean
Ridings
via email and he's tries to involve us on everything. And so there's that collaboration. It's not a very sexy term, but I think they're a member of NAM. Anything that we do is available to America's Newspapers. They have graciously allowed everything that they do. That's what you need. You got to go full bore in tackling these challenges. And we have not always been a very collaborative industry. And I think the intensity of the competition is causing that to change, and that's a good thing. I think we're all on the same side. The innovation comes in the process of how you do that together.
That's why I was mentioning the herding cats, because sometimes people have different ideas. Well, I was going to say people have different ideas of what the goal is. So let me ask Tom, you were just speaking, but you are the executive director, you're running this show. What is success to the Relevance Project? You must have a goal, maybe in stages, but what do you consider the success of the effort you're putting in?
I think we encourage innovation. I think we help maintain the survival of newspapers. We change the message from a negative that we're going out of business to a positive that we're here, we're part of the community, we're vitally important. We find new routes to revenue. There's lots of experimentation in revenue. You tick off a couple of reasons to go there. I think also success from a NAM standpoint is seeking to convert this local expertise that's in the newspapers to the various associations and build that into national prominence. That's a wild card for NAM to play as being a coalition of trade associations, but we're stronger putting all our parts together. So I think success is to call more attention to that national prominence, is to change the narrative about newspapers, journalism as a service, journalism in popularity, and also to try to show how the community forum, which newspapers had been, is still a real opportunity for us to get back. We've talked about COVID and all the attention there. And our goal is to make sure ensures that the newspapers go back to being that community forum with one other provision, which I feel real strong about, and that is being the proponent of civil discourse. Boy, do we need that right now. And if newspapers who are there, the army of facts, can be that moderator of the community forum in tandem with the community to help find solutions, then the business will find its next success levels. So I think we're after the success of newspapers first and foremost. We're at the advancement of journalism during very tough times, but we're also after helping the state and provincial press associations continue their high service degree of excellence.
Can you add to that, New York Press? I mean, what do you think? Michelle, what would you add to that indicator of success from the mission?
Well, for one thing, just to back up a little bit, NAM has a superpower that nobody else has. Collectively, throughout the United States and Canada, we represent more than 8,400 newspapers. Nobody does that. Not America's newspapers, not the News Media Alliance, not LMA. Nobody has that power. So we have this incredible superpower. So the goal is for Tom to disseminate this information in a very controlled way so that on one day or in 1 week, 8,400 newspapers would spread a single message. Maybe it's about the fact that 7 out of 10 readers act on a home improvement ad and it causes them to buy something. Maybe it's an editorial standard dealing with COVID or dealing with some other basic premise that our democracy is founded on, whether, again, it's environmental or educational or health, whatever it is. But if every one of these 8,400 newspapers is disseminating this messaging and then the influencers in their communities are reading it, our ability to bring about change is just tremendous. We have an incredible amount of power.
Steve, you're the boss of the association. What can you add to that measure of success and mission?
Well, everybody's focused on COVID, but I will tell you this. I think that there is a disease out there that is far, far worse, and that is affecting our local democracy. And once that's gone, there is nothing else. And the only vanguards that are standing there trying to protect it is the local media, and that's different from coast to coast to coast. It's not the same. It is certainly not the same in rural Saskatchewan as it is in downtown Los Angeles. I can tell you that right now. We need to protect that. The revenue from advertising has been the fuel to protect democracy, and we're getting starved of the fuel. And whether that's deliberate or not, I think we're in an environment now we can see what it is when there's only opinion pieces out there and no real actual news. And we're seeing that right now. We're living it right now. I haven't got one newspaper that would survive operating the way that the collective internet does of things, with just people putting out their opinion pieces in their communities. They would be closed up, gone. The community would not accept it. So for me, fake news is not something that we have to deal with. We have people saying fake news when they don't like what they're reading. But when you live and die out your front door, like all my members do, they are full of integrity, and journalistic standards are paramount to their operations.
That was so well said. I was waiting for someone to say that what we also do is we check those that we elect. And without that, I mean, if I can use that overused phrase, but absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? I mean, right. And that's the challenge we have when we lobby in Washington to the people that don't like us because we're fact checking them all the time. That's right. But that's journalism. But Mike, it's best.
Do you think the public has forgotten how to tell the difference between a news article and an opinion piece?
Yeah, I wrote an editorial about that got a lot of play. Yes, I discussed this a lot. The problem is that the reason I love this industry and the reason I wanted to be, when E&P was looking for its next, I don't even think I'm the owner. I think I'm more like I'm holding on to it till the next person. But the reason I love this industry is we clearly define the difference between fact and opinion. We have separate pages we call opinion pages. And then we have journalists that we hire the right ones and get rid of the wrong ones that purport news. And when I watch cable news, it's so blended now, I'm not even sure what is fact, what is opinion, or what is entertainment. And that, I think, has, how should I say that, has put a little bit of a virus, if I can use that term, into the ecosystem that we need to make sure we're part of, to get fact. I mean, and again, and as I stated in the editorial, all news, correct me if I'm wrong, these are industry leaders, all news is biased because it's written by a human being, right? We're not algorithms. We write stories but we base them on the facts we gather, but that's why there's multiple media outlets, correct? So it does frustrate me, Steve. You asked me for my opinion as the publisher of the magazine, but yeah, it frustrates me dearly that we are now in a world just full of opinion. However, thank God for us, right? I mean, we're still there.
The best opinions are based on fact, based on a factual argument, and I think that's where the newspapers can call the ball that strikes. Our business is built on that. But, our industry could use some more facts in explaining who we are to those who don't have the tradition with us. And I think that's another opportunity for the Relevance Project. I've heard more calls for news literacy in the schools. And I've also heard from when I was publisher about how they don't teach civic affairs anymore or current events. Well, that's because the newspaper and education sort of withered. Right. And what their source was online. So you've got, I think part of the Relevance Project's help is to help pile up those facts to make even more stronger argument and not to back off and not to assume that people understand us. Because media is so fractured, our products don't speak for themselves. Something else has to accompany that, whether it be branding messages or explanations or marketing campaigns or promotions, or conversations like this in press associations, constantly talking about it and not assuming that people understand your value. We've got to win the benefit of doubt about newspapers. Once you win that benefit of doubt, that trust is restored.
I remember a class in junior high school in suburban Philadelphia where we spent a month dissecting the local paper and understanding it.
One of the things that Tom will do is he will create a resource kit for newsrooms to show them how to communicate with their readers, to tell them how the news is reported, how it's edited, how it's laid out, what the priorities are, how we decide what goes on page one, what the opinion page means, what the editorial page means, as opposed to what page means. And he'll do the same thing for the ad departments. He'll give them a resource kit that will enable them to go into communities and articulate to advertisers, store owners, what the value of our audience is, what the buying power that audience has, how often they shop in the local downtowns, that kind of thing. And he'll do the same thing for the state press associations and try to create a resource kit for them to go out to larger advertisers and to provide better services to their newspapers. So he has very specific things that he is charged with developing and disseminating to all of those various constituencies.
Well, and what with 8,500 newspapers, Michelle, who better than the associations to be able to manage that workload? Because it's a huge amount of newspapers.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for your amazing insights, for your time, and more importantly, for your commitment. Because again, as I said at the beginning, in jest, but it's true, you guys ain't doing this for the money. I mean, there's no question. I mean, Tom, you didn't say, gee, let me retire from the industry and make more money running the Relevance. No, you guys are doing this, and I can already tell, for your love of the industry. And Tom, if I may repeat something, I was honored that when you got the job, one of the people you reached out to was me. You sent me an email saying, Mike, I know you got E&P, introduce, and we've known each other, but I wanted to tell you this. I'll say the same thing I said to you back then. Count us in. We will help support you. We believe in your initiative, and that we'll do everything we can to help get your message out.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would not recommend retiring into a pandemic.
Thank you. Tom, Steve, Michelle, hang in. Oh, by the way, I always ask this at the end. I know the music's playing right now. Tom, if someone wants to learn more about either A, contributing, supporting, getting your materials, or just chatting with you about the weather, how do they get a hold of the Relevance Project?
They can send me an email at TAS, my initials, at relevanceproject.net, or call me up at 804-690-3361. And if you're not a telemarketer, I'll answer it.
TAS at the Relevance Project?
Relevance Project, not
relevanceproject.net. No the. All right, guys, have a wonderful day. All of you, please stay healthy, and thanks for your valuable time.
Thanks
Mike.
Appreciate it.